Hi, welcome to Consumer Affairs Meet the Expert. I'm here with Dr. Ken Tudor, the contributing editor for Consumer Affairs Cat Food Guide. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Tudor. If you could tell us, what are the top 3 most important factors when selecting a cat food?
You're going to be surprised at my answer because you're going to think it has to do with the food and stuff, but it actually has to do with the cat. And I think first and foremost is recognizing that a cat is an obligate carnivore. They're a land shark, if you will, and they need a high protein, high fat diet. The second thing is cats are naturally thirst tolerant. They evolved in an arid climate and had to derive most of their water from their prey. And so they do not actively seek water, even when they're on dry diets. They will not consume the necessary water, which will drive up the urinary the concentration of their urine. I think that needs to be taken into account when you select cat food. And then third is cats are grazers. And this makes things really complicated because now we've said that they're meat eaters, that they're thirst tolerant, so canned food would be the likely thing to feed them. But because of their grazing habits of leaving their food, the food dries out, and the one thing cats hate is dried out cat food. So it becomes really problematic for the owners with the temperament of cats, even though wet food might be a better way to feed them. Also, it's very difficult, especially in multi-cat households, to put all of these things together, try and meet a cat's needs when you're working, because you can't be home like the retired baby boomer feeding the cats every 3 to 4 hours. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration when you decide and how you decide what you're going to feed, if it's going to be a combination, and how you're going to allocate that food and schedule those feedings.
In the guide we have listed 3 types. What are the many factors that go into selecting what type is best for your cat?
Yeah, again, I'm going to talk mostly about the needs of the cat. And I think most veterinarians will agree that canned food is a better choice if the cats will eat it, because it does satisfy the high protein, the higher fat, and the higher water content. One of the problems, of course, with cats is they can be very finicky with regards to texture. And so a chunky food and gravy may appeal to some cats, where others prefer pate and will only lick the gravy out of if they're given the chunky and gravy. So I think wet food, everyone agrees, is the way to go, but which wet food can be problematic as well. I think feeding cats wet food is important with regards to health reasons as well. We do know that urinary tract disease and diabetes and obesity are better addressed with canned food because of its high water content. Thirdly, I think individual preference of the animal. And there are cats that do prefer dry food alone. But here's the problem. You need to find out what your cat likes, because if they don't like it, they will go on a hunger strike. Well, a hunger strike can be very, very harmful to their liver if it goes even 5 to 6 days, especially if the animal's overweight. So you don't want a hunger strike. So it's really important to find out what your cat's preference is so you can feed accordingly. And then, of course, we have to mix this on the owner's individual preference and what works for their lifestyle. And so then all of this can make it very complicated to feed a cat. And I'm the first to admit that it is. Again, especially in multi-cat households. But all of these are a factor in deciding how much dry, or are we going to feed dry? And if we're going to feed wet, how often are we going to feed wet? And calculating those calories and making sure that we don't feed to obesity.
So if someone was to walk into a store, what would you tell them before they purchased any cat food?
Well, this is related to the question I just talked about, is they have to know what their strategy is. They have to know how they're going to feed, how they're going to break up the feed, and not just randomly go in and buy a bunch of cans of this and a bunch of cans of that and some of this. And as I mentioned previously as well, knowing whether you're going to get pate or chunk and gravy, and and which of your cats are going to prefer which of those. So I think having an idea of what strategy meets your needs is important before you ever step into a pet store, because once you're in there, again, you're going to be overwhelmed.
You already touched on my next question, but what are some of the other most common mistakes when choosing a cat food for your cat?
Actually, that is one of them, but fixating on buzz with them as well. This notion of ash in a cat's diet is a dead notion. We veterinarians buried it about 10 years ago, but somehow it is the main thing that still filters on the internet. Now, it is true, with animals with specific urinary problems, we have to coordinate certain minerals. But to just blanketly say that ash is a problem and look for foods that are necessarily lower in ash is not going to solve the urinary problems of cats. Another is just like in dogs, is purchasing too much food. The tendency, especially in multi-cat households, is to get a huge bag of dry cat kibble. And what happens is the instant we open the bag, that food is going to be subject to oxidation processes of the air. And since we're using natural preservatives over artificial preservatives now, which are vitamin E and C, vitamin E, C and E, fatty acids, and many of the B vitamins are subject to oxidation and degradation by oxygen very, very rapidly. So an open bag of cat food's nutritional value suffers over time. And once we get out to 2-3 months, we're looking at a substantial loss of some vital nutrients. And this happens even if it's in a closed container. The other thing I would like to point out is that dry food will not help tartar or dental disease in cats because cats can't anatomically chew. And anyone who's seen a cat eat dry kibble knows they have to tilt their head to get the gravity to push the food so that they can crack it, because cats have no lateral jaw-to-jaw movement.
Reading and understanding cat food labels or the material on the cat food maker's website can be confusing. In fact, the information may be misleading. What are kind of some helpful tips that you can give pet owners?
Well, the first is the first ingredient rule. Because of the way that AAFCO has stated the list of ingredients, they are listed in order of their weight. And oftentimes, and most of the time, the manufacturer will list a meat first. But AAFCO allows that weight to include the water weight, which is substantially higher than you would think. It can be as high as 70-75%. So once the water is subtracted, the actual content of that meat is moved down the ingredient level quite significantly. So what you want to look at is the second source of protein or the third source of protein, because that's going to be the actual protein in the food. The other helpful tip I would give is that labeling is not reflective of reality. And the words like holistic, wholesome, premium have no legal meaning whatsoever. So companies can use them randomly and at will, but they don't indicate that a food has any superior qualities to a brand that doesn't have it. Natural and organic do have some legal meanings, well, natural with AAFCO. And basically what it says is that anything that comes from an animal, a plant, or the earth is natural and is only unnatural if it's processed or mixed with synthetic products. And AAFCO has no standards for organic and relies on companies using the human standards, which they are under no obligation to do. So reading the labels can be very distressing. And for more information, the viewers may want to look at my editor's notes. And then the definition of meats. Meats are not what you consider meats with regards to regulations for animals. Hoofed animals, for instance, meat means, yes, striated muscle like we eat, but can include tongue, esophagus, diaphragm, heart, and all of the blood vessels, nerves, and other tissue that overlie those particular parts of the body. Meat with regards to poultry is defined as the flesh and skin, with or without bone, minus beaks and feet and entrails. But that doesn't mean that it's breast meat or leg meat. It means flesh left after the breast and the leg meat has been taken off. And for fish, it's even worse because fish, the definition of fish meat includes head, scales, fins, backbone, intestines, and everything else in the fish after the fillets have been removed. So when you see something that says all meat, you have to be careful what flashes in your mind with relative to what's really in that can. Also, the feeding instructions are very misleading because they are instructions for ideal weight, and we estimate that cat obesity is probably worse than even dog obesity in the United States. So feeding a cat based on their present weight is a recipe for overfeeding them. The other thing about the feeding instructions, especially for dry food, is that they are for a measured 8-ounce measuring cup. Not just a random coffee cup or scoop or whatever you use as the equivalent. It has to be measured, and you have to measure precisely. And the other thing I would say is weight reduction food. Weight reduction food only requires that if it says has less calories, it has less calories than whatever that food is being compared to. Breed specific, we don't see too much of that in cat food as we do in dog food, but that would be something that you want to shy away from because there is no scientific data to support breed specificity with regards to feeding the cat. And then the seventh thing is you cannot compare the guaranteed analysis on dry food versus wet or semi-moist because of the water contents are different, and it requires a special math in order to do that. And unfortunate that it requires that. It shouldn't be that way, but you have to have a calculator to go in and know that actually canned food has more protein per amount of dry matter than bagged food.
Thank you, Dr. Tudor, for your time today. For more information, make sure to check out the Consumer Affairs Cat Food Guide and be sure to keep an eye out for our other Meet the Expert segments. Finally, thank you for joining us today, and remember, Consumer Affairs, we have your back.